and for bunching up in the middle. It looks a much more cosy gathering. I am very happy to be able to introduce Lindsay German, who you've met before, I think, a lot of you, and Major David Pinder, who I met through, I suppose, doing a piece on Look North in BBC television in Leeds on the subject of Joe Glenton. He very kindly then volunteered to come and speak at the meeting at some time. And, okay, sorry, do I need to speak up? Yes. And so here he is. And we have these two people to give us, I think, and rather hope, their differing views on what we've achieved in Afghanistan in the last 10 years and what we should do now. I'll just give very brief introductions. Lindsay German is a lifelong socialist and a campaigner in all sorts of campaigns for the last 10 years. Perhaps she didn't think it would take so long. She's been convener of the National Stop the War Coalition. She's a former editor of the Socialist Review. She's written several books on, as she puts it, women and war, one called Material Girls and one called Stop the War. She's writing a People's History of London, which will be published next year. And she stood twice in the elections for the Lord Mayor of London.
No, Mayor. It's not Lord Mayor.
Mayor of London. That's what I got down here. That's what you told me.
Well, definitely.
And so even Boris is not a lord.
Exactly. Exactly.
And she speaks regularly on radio and television. You may have heard and seen her, as indeed I have. Major Pinder was in the army for 29 years. He's kept quiet about a lot of it. I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting stuff there. He's only told me about the last two jobs, which were as Chief of Public Information and Chief Press Spokesman for NATO in North Germany when Gorbachev was in power. I take it this was up to the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
That's right.
Yes. And after that, he was acting head of civil affairs and chief press spokesman for the UN in Bosnia. And then in 1993, he moved to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. After retiring, he did an MPhil in counterinsurgency at Bradford University, and now he lectures there, and is now writing a book on counterinsurgency called Draining the Swamp. For variety, he's also writing a book on the Luddites called Mills, Mayhem and Murder. I don't know if David's book on the Luddites and Lindsay's book, People's History of London.
I think there was some synergy.
Yes. I'd say he's also been in the more. Last year you were Lord Mayor or Mayor?
Well, we don't have a Lord Mayor in local politics.
I should have never said Lord.
So I was Mayor of Murfield.
Yes. He was Mayor of Murfield. Okay, I don't want to take up much time.
Haven't we?
Of course we have. The Community of the Resurrection.
The Community of the Resurrection.
Yes. I won't take any longer. I'll invite Lindsay first to speak for, say, 10 minutes, her point of view, then David. Then if Lindsay wants to come back briefly to David, fine. After that, I'll throw it open. This time, following comments on the last time I did this, I'll ask for several questions in a clump and then ask the speakers to be kind enough to respond. And I hope there will be questions or provocative ideas, and please not speeches. So now I'll call on Lindsay to start.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, John, and thanks for everybody for coming. And I'd like to obviously say I'm very pleased to be debating with David. I think we need these kind of debates. There's very, very little opportunity in this country, despite the fact that they justify 10 years of war. They don't do so by any serious debate. I mean, when do you hear these kind of debates in television and radio? Very, very rarely. So I think it's very good that David has volunteered to come and talk to us here. I don't know whether in the end of the day, because nearly always when I've debated with people from the military, I find that actually there's more agreement than you might otherwise think. I don't think there's total agreement, I'm sure there won't be, and I'm sure we will disagree over many things, but I think that actually the importance, we have to do these things because we have to get this argument, not just to the people in the room here tonight, but to the people of York, to the people of every town in this country, because this is a war which has now gone on longer than the First World War, longer than the Second World War, pretty nearly longer than both together. But, and you know, you have to have some justification for 10 years of war. We are not living in the Middle Ages, or, you know, there has to be some justification for it. And my argument is that there isn't a justification for it. But I didn't agree with the war when it happened. Some of you will have been involved with the war right from the very beginning. We were formed 10 years ago this month, actually, following the events of 9/11. And what we said then was, however terrible the events were, and we've had them all rerun on our television for week after week earlier this month, however terrible it is to see people who died in that way and jumping out of windows and to certain death and all the other things that we saw. But what George Bush and Tony Blair would do would actually put those 3,000 deaths into the shade. And that has been proved to be the case. Nobody really knows how many people have died in these wars. The top estimates in Iraq are up to 1 million people. But it's pretty generally recognised that something at least around 500,000 people died in Iraq, 4 million refugees. Afghanistan doesn't have the same number of deaths, or it doesn't appear to have anything like the same number of deaths, but you are talking about tens of thousands of dead. A UN report a few years ago gave the figure for the first part of the Afghan war, for the first 2 months of it, at 20,000 civilian deaths. So whatever figure you want to put on it today, you are talking again tens of thousands. The cost to the British, American and other NATO ISAF troops in Afghanistan has been much less severe. Nonetheless, it has been a very severe cost. Nearly 400 British soldiers killed in Afghanistan and several thousand American troops killed. So, you know, you're talking about quite a severe number of casualties in a war like this. We also said it wouldn't make the world a safer place. I think this is incontrovertibly true. The threat of terrorism is much, much worse than it was 10 years ago. Britain was not under threat 10 years ago. It's fair enough to say the United States was under threat and was hit 10 years ago, but it wasn't true of Britain. You didn't have Al-Qaeda in a whole number of countries where they now exist, including in Libya, where they're now part of the new ruling government. You didn't have them in places like Somalia and Yemen and all these places. Al-Qaeda has spread. It hasn't been contained or finished with, and despite the assassination of bin Laden earlier this year, and again this was supposed to draw yet another line under all these wars, actually it is absolutely clear that whatever you want to name it, that Al-Qaeda and its various associates, if you want, or similar groups are very, very much there and will continue to be there while we avoid the political solutions, which in my belief are the only way that you can deal with terrorism. We have lots of experience. David has a lot more direct experience, which I don't know whether he'll bring in tonight of some of these things, but we know, for example, in Ireland, that it took more than 30 years of serious terrorist activity, actually much more serious terrorist activity in London and in Britain than anything that we've seen from Islamic terrorists. I mean, Margaret Thatcher's closest advisor was blown up in the House of Commons car park, and we still didn't have the kind of infringements on civil liberties and so on that we have today, supposedly to deal with Islamic terrorism. And my belief is that this war is not only was not justified in the first place, but it is now manifestly failing in any of its serious aims. The government there is an official index of government corruption, and Afghanistan is in the top 10 corrupt governments in the world, as is Iraq. So much for Western democracy and all these other kinds of things. Afghanistan is the second poorest country in the world. Its life expectancy is 45 years, something like half, a bit more than half of what you'd expect in a country like Britain or one of the richer countries in the world. Many, many girls still don't go to school. The condition of women in Afghanistan is generally regarded as extremely difficult. Forced marriages, rapes, having to wear, even if you're not by law having to wear a burqa, but often wearing a burqa or similar clothes, because it's actually a very dangerous situation for women not to do so. You still have the warlords who run much of the country, and you have a situation where a recent report said that in Afghanistan today, every single day, there are 40 houses which are raided by occupying troops. 40 houses where people are, where they break in, where they sometimes kill the people, sometimes take them to prison, where they frighten the families. And now, Afghanistan has a population similar to the state of Texas. And I think we can all imagine if in Texas 40 houses were being raided every day by an occupying force, you can imagine the resentment, the fact that many young people in particular would see themselves as wanting to fight against this kind of occupation. And it seems to me that this and the airstrikes, which have increased threefold in the last year, are continuing. So the Afghans are suffering. And this is a war which I don't believe the NATO forces can win. I don't believe there is any question of them winning in any serious sense this war in Afghanistan. If you look what has happened in recent weeks, in Kabul, in the safest part of Kabul, the diplomatic part, there have been attacks on the British Council, which was on the day of Independence Day in August, which is independence from the British back in 1919. There have been attacks on the CIA, there have been attacks on the American Embassy, on the NATO headquarters, on the Afghan government building. Now this is the capital city, which is not in a position to seriously be defended. I mean, the American ambassador, who strikes me as one of the less intelligent of that breed, if you want to mark them by this kind of thing, said, well, this is nothing, it's only a few people. A few people who managed to launch an attack on key government and international buildings. As well as that, President Karzai, who was very unpopular